Hello and welcome. This is the third attempt to try and record something. You know, when things go wrong technically, you're probably doing the right thing. So these are the readings for the 24th Sunday of the year, and they're all about forgiveness. And they come from St. Matthew chapter 18, beginning at verse 21. To be forgiven, you must forgive. Peter went up to Jesus and said, "Lord, how many times must I forgive my brother if he wrongs me? As often as 7? And Jesus answered, "Not 7, I tell you, but 77 times." And so the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who decided to settle his accounts with his servants. And when the reckoning began, they brought him a man who owed 10,000 talents. But he had no means of paying. So his master gave orders that he should be sold together with his wife and his children and all his possessions to meet the debt. At this the servant threw himself down at his master's feet. "Give me time," he said. "I'll pay the whole sum." And the servant's master felt so sorry for him and let him go, cancelled his debt. Now as the servant went out, he happened to meet a fellow servant who owed him 100 denarii, and he seized him by the throat and began to throttle him, saying, "Pay you what you owe me." And his fellow servant fell at his feet and implored him, saying, "Give me time and I'll pay you." But the first servant wouldn't agree. On the contrary, he had him thrown into prison until he should pay all his debt. And his fellow servants were deeply distressed when they saw what had happened, and they went to their master and reported the whole affair to him. And the master sent for him. "You wicked servant," he said. "I cancelled all that debt of yours when you appealed to me. Were you not bound then to have pity on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you?" And in his anger the master handed him over to the torturers till he should pay all his debt. And that is how my heavenly Father will deal with you, unless you each forgive your brother from your heart. Well, this is one of those readings that's central to the whole business of being a Christian, and is so important. We make this terrible mistake of asking for justice in our world. It's quite a leap to ask for justice without believing in God. After all, where do we get our concepts of justice from if there is no God and there is no objective scale of absolute values? But people forget that. They want justice. In fact, most of the time people want revenge. When hurt, we want to get back at people who've hurt us, and frankly hurt them a lot more than they hurt us. So if you like, the scale of economy, of relationship between people begins at one end with revenge, and then as you travel along the scale in a slightly more moderate way, people settle for justice. And at the other end you have Christian forgiveness, which is completely counterintuitive and a very odd thing to do, and appears to be without power and without the capacity to control or change people. And yet, paradoxically, it has much more power to change people than you could possibly imagine. The key to it, I think, is that we don't understand how indebted we are to God. We don't have a clear sense of that scale of moral value, the absolute scale, which our grasp is relative, of how deeply in debt to God, the source of all purity and perfection, that we are. We have no idea how badly in deficit, or the fact that we really can never pay what we owe morally. We can't clear our account. We're so in the red that when we're held to account, we're going to be in deep trouble, and there's nothing we can sell or give to make up for it. And actually, it doesn't matter how hard we try, but our anger, our pride, our greed, our lust, our appetite, our covetousness, our sense of revenge, our anger, all these things we wade through day after day after day don't compare when they're weighed in the balance of God's scales with the good things that we do. Actually, there aren't that many good things we do anyway, but even if there were, even if we'd done 10 times as many good things, they still wouldn't compare, given the human condition, to what we owe. But of course the problem is that people don't have a sense of what the absolute scale is in the universe, of God's purity, and how we're going to be held to account. Every so often, when our conscience kicks in, or when we take a tumble in life, we suddenly get a glimpse of how deeply in trouble we are, but not very often. Most of the time we only have a sense of how deeply in trouble other people are, according to our judgment, wanting revenge or justice. Imagine if we got justice for our behaviour, for our acts, all the secret stuff that goes on behind the scenes, let alone the stuff we've done in public or we've actually done. I mean, these are three levels, aren't the stuff we've done in public, the stuff we've done but haven't been seen or caught for, and the stuff we do in the privacy of our imaginations, which only God sees, but he does see and is real. Jesus tells us that our imaginations and our hidden desires are so real that they count as actually having done them, which is why we need forgiveness. My beginning of my road as a Christian was profoundly affected by this sense of forgiveness, because something very odd happened to me when I was 19. I was in North America on a music camp with some other musicians, and the man who was running it, a man called Ricardo, wasn't paying us our money, and so my fellow teachers said to me, "Gavin, you have the biggest mouth," or something like that. "You go and persuade him to pay us." So I confronted Ricardo and I said, "You need to pay us the money you owe." And apparently my arguments didn't really persuade him, so I was quite well built in those days. I was an oarsman, and I grabbed him by the lapels and I shook him until he agreed to pay. But I hated the violence, and it upset me very deeply. And I went away, and there were other things upsetting me. A lot of things had come to the surface. And I had kept a bottle of vodka for a party, and I took the vodka and I drank it. Now, I have no capacity for drinking alcohol at all, and if I drink 3 pints of Guinness, well, my bowels know about it for days. But the effect of drinking a litre of vodka may very well have permanently damaged my respiratory system, because I passed out, and then I had one of those things that I've since learned, having done some study in the area, are called near-death experiences. They're really quite common, and mine took the form of my leaving my body, seeing my body left on the floor, and I went up to what I thought were the courts of heaven, and I came to judgment. I remember I had some very odd things happened, which I don't think I could have made up, but you have to be the judge of that. And the first thing happened was that this thought occurred to me: this is judgment, and if I'm sent to hell, I will at least have the satisfaction of knowing that the universe has justice at its heart. I hadn't done much wrong on a kind of obvious scale, on my scale, even on your scale at 19. But deep inside me, I think something new. And I stood in the front of the courts of heaven and in front of a very, very bright light, a nuclear light, and God's presence was both singular and plural at the same time. And then this verse from what I later discovered was the book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse, happened. And it said, there was silence in heaven for half an hour. Heaven went out, and I was left there suspended, waiting for judgment. Heaven came back, and it was decided I would be forgiven and sent back. And the next thing I knew, I was coming to myself in my body on the floor. It was dawn, about 5 hours later, I suppose, in clock time. And the very strange thing was that I felt fabulous. I felt physically so well, and spiritually and mentally and psychologically really well. I felt like I'd been forgiven everything. I was like newborn. I could start again. And the first thing, this is the important bit, the first thing I wanted to do was to go and forgive the man I got so angry with last night. It actually descended into farce at that point. I had to wait till he got up. I hung around stalking him to see him, to catch him, to say, "Look, I'm really sorry. Please forgive me, and I forgive you completely." I knew to hold on to this feeling of being forgiven, I had to forgive him, so I had to find him to forgive him. Came out of a door of a hut in this music camp, and I said, "Ricardo, I need to talk to you." And he took one look at me and began walking the other way quite fast. And I walked fast, and he walked faster. So I began to run. He ran away from me. began to chase him with my arms out. I must have looked very threatening. Eventually I caught him and I found myself shaking him, saying, "Stand still long enough, I'm here to forgive you." Terrible. Very badly handled. But behind it all was this very, very profound sense. I could not keep on to this sense of having been forgiven unless I forgave freely from my heart. It took a couple of years before I discovered that the light, the forgiveness, the compassion, that being that knew me better than I knew myself and had mercy on me and sent me back, gave me my life back, that the light was the light of the world, Jesus. And when I discovered that, I became a signed-up Christian. And quite a lot of the time, the Christian life can seem like a very quite hard ethical burden. I mean, for turning the other cheek when we're hurt or wounded or offended or belittled can seem to be incredibly hard, until one discovers that what we're doing is we're putting a banana skin under the feet of evil. Evil is predicated upon revenge and a kind of justice, not real justice, but a kind of like for like. But this is not a real calibrated scale at all. It's a fake scale meant to serve our own sense of pride. And because we're proud and because our scale is so badly calibrated, we call it justice, but it's really revenge we want. And if we ever got justice from God, we'd be in such trouble. We would be found in the scales and found completely wanted. And as we found in the book of Daniel, mene tekel parsin, you've been found in the scale, you've been weighed in the scales and found wanting. So revenge is no good. Justice isn't any good. It will rebound on us. Forgiveness is the only way we can survive. And I remember hearing arguments, abstruse arguments. Should we wait until someone apologizes before we forgive them? And the answer is absolutely not. We have to be willing to forgive from our heart. But the key to that is God's scale. And when we look at God's ethical scale and we see how deeply in debt we are, and then we look at Jesus on the cross and we discover he's hung there and been wounded there and bled there and died there, paying our debt, we are so grateful that we can't withhold that forgiveness from anybody. And if at any stage we find the pain and the humiliation of what others have done to us, and my goodness, they do things to us, stabbing us in the front and in the back, mistrusting our motives, bad-mouthing us, the whole range of trouble that we have at one another's hands. If at any stage we find the pain too difficult, as I do quite frequently, the antidote is to look at ourselves and what we owe God, this enormous debt that piles up from day to day, even after we've become Christians, which God wipes clean in his love every time we get on our knees and say, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, Christe eleison, Christ have mercy, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. And he does. His death on the cross is the guarantee that his mercy is endless. And as we forgive it, we pass it on to others. And it is in the passing on that it's kept real for us. This is such a completely different way of living life, that it sets Christians on a wholly different road. It gives Christians different faces, whereas the faces of those around us harden in anger and resentment and bitterness. And in the end, the anger, resentment and the bitterness, they mark people's faces like a kind of tan of angst. Whereas Christians who look upon the face of Jesus and have looked on him for years, receiving and giving and transacting forgiveness, their faces look different. They're lighter. There's more light in the eyes. There's more joy. There's a lightness of tread. And we sidestep those blows to our pride, those traps to our ego, and we sidestep them by turning the other cheek. And my goodness, it's difficult, because pride does not lie down and die when we tell it to. It is so easily evoked, so easily stirred up. The mud and the poison at the bottom of the glass so easily get churned up. And the only antidote is to go back and kneel before the crucifix and say, Lord, have mercy upon me, a sinner. You do. Praise you, thank you, bless you. I am forgiven. I'm forgiven so much. I could not possibly withhold your forgiveness, my forgiveness, from others. Being a Christian is a completely different way of being a human being. It's a completely different way of doing our economy of ethics and virtue. It's a completely different calibration of the ethical scales that we live by in this world. It's one of the reasons why, if you're truly Christian, you cannot hope to try and build some kind of politically correct utopia where there's justice and equality, because you know what the human heart is capable of. You know how in the grip of evil we are, how the father of lies whispers lies to us and we believe them and inflict them on each other. We know that there can be no level playing field, no equality, no steady state of goodness, because we are always being trapped and fallen because of the way in which the human heart is so vulnerable to pride and anger and ego and self-interest. And so, instead of trying to build heaven on earth in political terms and social terms, we try and build heaven in our hearts, because we know it's by the transformation of the human heart that life on earth is bettered, though we're aware that the earth is in the grip of a different power, a different prince. The prince of this world, Jesus said, the devil, he who sets the scales of this world and demands revenge in the hearts of those who listen to him. But not in Christians. We sidestep by forgiving. Not once, not 7 times, but 70 times 7, without limit. Because the moment we place limit on those we forgive, we place limit on our own forgiveness, and the doors of heaven are closed to us. We know we need the doors of heaven to be open to us, so we can be at home with our beloved, so that we can be healed and have the tears wiped from our eyes, so we can be weighed in the balance and found wanting, and then discover that Jesus places his thumb on the other side of the scales and they are changed, because he's borne the price. To be a Christian is to be free from this trap, to be free forever from judgment, to be free from paying our debts, the debts we could never afford. And so our willingness to forgive is accompanied by joy, by gratitude, by trust and by praise, which marks us as Christ's people. How often do we forgive? Not once, not 7 times, not 70 times 7. No, we want the doors of heaven to be held open forever. To him be the glory, now and unto the ages of ages. Amen.